Hello, everyone. Hello, testing. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Hi, I'm Liz Farrell, Artistic Director of Painting, Drawing, and Printmaking. Welcome to Anderson Ranch and our first night of our summer faculty lecture series. We are so glad to welcome you to campus, and I want to welcome our virtual participants watching tonight as well. Students participating in workshops beginning tomorrow will meet right here in the morning at 8:45 for orientation. Before we begin, please silence your cell phones. And tonight we will hear from two artists back to back, and following their lectures, we will hold a Q&A to give folks the chance to ask questions. So to begin, I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. Anderson Ranch would like to acknowledge that our campus resides on the traditional ancestral territory of the Ute people who've called the Roaring Fork Valley and beyond home for over 800 years. It's an honor and a pleasure to introduce Miguel Aragon. Miguel lives and works in New York City and Berlin. He's an associate professor in printmaking at CUNY College of Staten Island. Aragon was exhibited internationally at venues including the Francis Young Tang Teaching Museum and Art Gallery, Saratoga Springs, New York, and Uferhallen, Berlin, Germany, and the Society of Northern Alberta Print Artists in Canada. His awards and residencies include NYSCA, NIFA Artist Fellowship, Kayla Art Institute in Berkeley, California, Zygote Press in Cleveland, Ohio, and Till Richter Museum in Bugenhagen, Germany. Aragon's works explore subjects of violence, transient and persistent memory, perception, and the multiple. He uses erasure as language through the use of processes that are reductive in nature. His work is held in the collections, including the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, National Museum of Mexican Art in Chicago, and Minneapolis Institute of Art. Please join me in welcoming Miguel Aragon.
Thank you, Liz. It's really wonderful to be here. I'm really excited. And before I start and before I forget, I always like taking a picture of the crowd. It helps me be less nervous. So, all right, because now you're on the spot. Excuse me. So yes, my name is Miguel Aragon, and I'm originally from Juárez, Mexico. And I want to start with this body of work, which obviously I think all of us can relate. So, and the reason that I start with this body of work is because I feel like it encapsulates a lot of the way that I'm thinking and the way that I approach making art. So I'm sure that everybody saw this newspaper, either digitally or in person, when this unfortunate event happened. So I remember I was in New York City. I had never seen the city as empty as, in that time, as many cities obviously were during those years or during that year. And I was doing a lot of walks at the time in the city because I just wanted to experience the city and the absence of people, especially in a so populated place. And during one of my walks, I actually run into the newspaper. Just basically, it was delivered to a business, and they never collected it. So I decided to pick it up. I had it in my studio for actually several weeks before I could actually even open it, and because I had seen the digital version, I have the digital subscription, and eventually one day I just decided I need to make some work about this, and so the way that I decided to approach it was, I knew that these were all names of people who have lost their lives because of the pandemic, because of COVID, and so I wanted to highlight those people, and the way to do it for me was to actually, in a way, take the names out of the newspaper, because I felt like the newspaper, they just kind of became all these letters that were, all jumbled, and you couldn't really read the whole thing because it was so overwhelming. And I wanted to highlight all of those individuals. So I cut them all up, and I was very thorough in making sure that I didn't lose track of how they were kind of set up. And so I ended up with this absence of, life, essentially, within the newspaper. So then I used this as stencils that I'm going to show next. But I also decided to use the names and their age, and just give them a life again, and what all of us were doing at the time, which was wearing this face mask. So I got about a bunch of face masks, and I just collaged their names to make sure that I gave presence to these individuals that were lost through the pandemic. And then, like I said, I used those pages to once again make those names, or the absence of those names, a little bit more apparent, screaming to the viewer. So I made these pieces in cyanotype. I also cut out the title or the headline and the name of the newspaper, obviously, just to make it more specific of where I was getting my sources. So like I said, this is kind of how I think about my work, thinking about people, and in a way the absence of life, and how it's gone from this world. I was born and raised in Ciudad Juárez, which is in the border with El Paso, Texas. This is kind of how it looks like. The blue line is the river that basically divides both countries, and I grew up in both places, so I feel like I'm neither Mexican and I'm also not an American. I'm a hybrid of both. Most people who grew up in the border, we all kind of feel that way because we get to experience both cultures, both cuisines, both everything, both languages, obviously. Unfortunately, growing up in 2006, the Mexican president at the time decided to declare an official war on drugs, and that changed the city and the landscape completely. Violence became a thing that was just apparent every single day in the city, and these were the kind of the scenes that we were looking at. And by then I was in my 20s already, so I wasn't a kid anymore. So I really saw the city change drastically. It became a place that I just didn't recognize anymore. The president decided to send special forces to sort of deal with violence, which unfortunately, the only thing that it did is actually create more violence. And it just became sort of a nightmare for everybody who were living in the city. This is only in Ciudad Juárez, though. El Paso, Texas, kind of remained the same. They were not affected. I guess because they were just a different country, and the violence didn't actually, moved or shifted to the U.S. So this is one of the pieces that I first made. I collected images and stories about the violence in Juárez for a long time. Since the mid-90s, I've been collecting these images, but I couldn't do any work about it. But I was always thinking about it, and it was this particular photograph that just made me. It pushed me to essentially make something about it, because I just couldn't, I could not do anything anymore at that point. Like, I had to do something and express and show it to the world, what was happening. So this is a photo. This is an image that I distilled from a photograph that I was actually published in the newspaper. And obviously you can see what what was happening, and the whole series goes through all the children, obviously, and then this is the final piece that I'm not showing the last part of it because I feel like that would be gratuitous, and that's not what I'm looking for. So just to explain my process, I'm trained as a printmaker, but I actually consider myself more of an experimental printmaker, and so I like making sure that my processes are connected with the idea. So for this particular series, I was using a laser engraver, and I was burning these images into the substrates, which are cardboard, and then picking up some of the areas by hand, as you can see here, to be able to create my plates. And the only thing that I'm printing is that suit that is being created by the machine from burning the cardboard. So for me, this was an idea that the process is violent, just as the way that these people lost their life. Sorry, I wasn't supposed to show that one just yet. But so the connection there is, the process being violent, just as the way that they were taken out of this life, and then also just having the ash being the last imprint of those people, in this world, making connection on how some of these people were killed by gunshots, and when somebody's shot at close range, it burns the body or it burns whatever they're wearing, leaving those sort of that suit. So the images in these pieces are based on the images that I showed next, and I only show it very very fast or very quickly because I don't want you to pay too much attention to the image because it's not about the image itself. It's more about the idea. So these were the images that we were looking at, every single day, multiple times a day, for many years. I mean, starting in 2006, and it probably ended. The heyday of the violence probably ended in like 2012, I want to say. And then since then, it's been up and down. And, there's years when the violence unfortunately comes back up, and then there's years when it's a little bit more peace in the city. So these pieces are much bigger. They're 22 by 30 inches, and like I said, all the pigmentation or all the coloration in these pieces is just the suit. It also has different layers of embossment, as you can see, and I wanted them to be physical. And the reason that they look abstracted was on purpose. So the idea for me is I'm using those images that, like the one that I'm showing you, which are basically crime scenes that we were actually exposed not only physically on our daily life simply by just walking out of our houses, but also they were published in the newspaper. So most of my sources are actually coming from the newspaper, the local newspaper at the time, these are some of those newspapers that I collected over the years, and decided to create this installation where I casted this stack of newspapers to kind of show the weight of how I felt. Because like I said, I've been collecting these newspapers since the mid-1990s, and it came to a point, I was still living in Juárez at the time, and I just had my closet basically full with all these newspapers. I looked like a hoarder, to a certain degree. And it just, every time that I would look at them, it was just such a weight for me to know that there were so many stories of lives being lost. And so I decided that I needed to show it somehow to the viewer, and this was my way of doing it. And this installation is meant to be in flux or in motion. I actually invite the viewer to come in and move the pieces around so they can actually pick up the newspaper and be able to read the stories and actually see the images even, because you can probably see some of the images in there already being published. So that's just installation shots when I showed it in Austin, Texas. And then from there, working from those images, I decided to concentrate more on portraits of those casualties of the war. And so I moved to another process, which was drilling one half-ton at a time. And in a way, what I was trying to do here was basically erase the figure or the portraits, in a way, thinking like how these people were taken out of this life. But at the same time, by erasing them, I'm kind of making them more present. And in a way, they're also, they're being highlighted, and I'm hoping that it's kind of being cleansed out of the violence, because I'm trying to erase all that violence through these pieces. So these were made in a stack of paper. So I would make stacks of white paper, black paper, and then that would be attached to a piece of drywall. And as you can see, the drywall is the one that actually suffered most of the violence. And they just kind of became like these interesting sculptures that unfortunately I can't really show them that often, or I can only show them once and only where I make them, because they're just very fragile to transport. And a lot of the times actually they actually broke when I was making them, and I had to like change the substrate and put them in another piece of drywall. So that's a close-up just to give you a sense of how much of it was just hard on it. The whole idea for these pieces or for this process was that, I was kind of sort of a surrogate of, recreating the violence. I didn't plan it that way necessarily, but I did pay attention that I was using a tool that it was shaped in a gun, obviously, and I'm using a violent process to draw these figures, but these figures were killed by, a tool that is shaped in the same way. So I obviously caught that, and so the reason that I made different layers of paper is because I wanted to have variations, and I assigned sort of like different. Each one represents something. So like the white paper for me represents the bones of the body. The black paper, because it gets a lot of the dust impregnated on it, it becomes kind of like a ghostly figure. So for me, that was the soul of the body. And then these pieces, I use one of the extras of those stencils to recreate the piece using a metallic copper enamel. And the reason for this is because there's a saying in Spanish that Mexicans, we have copper tone skin or brass tone skin. And so that was kind of like the reference of the copper, kind of recreating the figure in copper tone, making the reference to the skin tone. But also because there's another phrase, there's a phrase that says, "Estás sacando el cobre," which translated literally means you're showing the copper or you're taking out the copper, which is the equivalent of you're showing your true colors. And so the idea here is like they're showing their true colors, but what are their true colors? And the reason for this is because the portraits that I'm using, they are coming from casualties of war, both from police or officials, drug members, and also just innocent casualties. I'm not making any distinction, and I will not tell the viewer who is who, because I don't want you to judge these people. I just want you to know that Mexico lost generations of men because of this violence and because of this, these events. So these are just some installation shots of the pieces being shown. Obviously, it kind of comes with multiple pieces, but they're kind of varied multiples. So that's why I said that I'm more of an experimental printmaker, because I don't see myself as making traditional prints in that sense. I've made a couple of large pieces like this one, and then this is one of that's in a gallery, and then this is the largest I've made. And I think the presence is obviously very. It dawns on the viewer, pretty heavily. Obviously, I'm able to do traditional prints out of this process, and I did that with flatbed press. So we collaborated and we made a couple of woodcuts that we editioned, and then I also wanted to challenge myself. So I decided to also hand drill onto a piece of copper, and then we made, I had to make stencils, so I had to drill that image multiple times to be able to create the stencils, to be able to create the different layers of the aqua tint, and so that this was the final product in the end, which was really fun, and I really enjoyed it. But those are the only actual prints that I've made, out of this process. Most of the other portraits in the series, they're just the hand drills that I'm making, or those, more varied multiples. Now, over the years, I left Juárez to do my master's, and after my first semester of finishing it, I went back home to visit my mom, and I came back. My mom picked me up in the airport in El Paso, because it was easier, obviously, to fly from Austin to El Paso, and then she drove me into Mexico. And as she drove me into the city, I didn't recognize it. And I remember asking my mom, what happened to the city in these few months that I've been gone? And so she just turned to me and she said, what do you mean? And I said, well, the city is deserted. It looks completely run down, almost like a war zone. And she told me it's actually exactly the same as when I left. And I just had not realized it. And that's when it became apparent to me that living in the city throughout the violence, we all had shielded ourselves into not looking what the city was being morphed into and what was happening, because we needed to continue our lives, right? We needed to continue feeling, or pursuing happiness however we could. We were being obviously safe, trying not to go out too much into the streets because we didn't want to be gunned down, by mistake. But, what we ended up doing was basically just creating self-imposed prisons. We stayed most of the time in our house, and that's where we would have our gatherings. And I just couldn't believe that I had done that, and I didn't realize it until I had some distance and was able to come back and see it. So that was kind of shocking. I made that whole series, and then more recently, I've been going back to those original photographs, from the mid-'90s, and I'm now concentrating more on actually the forensics team, because I felt like I've spent a lot of the time on the cadavers or the people who have lost their life, and enhancing them. But after that series of the photographs, I realized, well, it not only affected those people who were gone from this world, who were taken out of this world violently, but it's also affected us who stayed, and particularly those people who had to deal with this aftermath. And so I'm doing this series of aqua tints that my hope is eventually to have, large enough where I can fill a whole room where all of them are going to be connected by that line, which is the police line, obviously. And they're going to be in different heights and different formats. And so this is still an in-progress work. I only have so far 10, but I definitely want to have, I have images for more than that, obviously. Another body of work that I'm doing more recently is my mom passed away in 2019. And so I had to go back and, just kind of archiving her, whatever she left behind. I felt like the need to memorialize her. So she crocheted a lot in her life, and she knitted a lot. So I found all of these, things that she made. These doilies and patterns when she was learning, and then things that she just did for the house to decorate the house. I remember growing up with those. As a kid, I remember seeing them in our living room and our kitchen. And so I decided to use those as, the inspiration for this next series, which is, these are just experiments at the moment of sort of creating this or using these patterns or these forms as sort of cellular, molecules to create this more formal experiments. And the reason that I'm seeing them as cellular elements is because my mom passed away due to a heart attack. And so that's something that it's now in my mind because my dad also passed away out of a heart attack. And so I feel like I'm screwed. Whenever I leave this world, that's most likely what's going to happen. So I'm kind of putting my own sort of mortality within this work. But at the same time, I don't see this work as sad, if I'm being honest. I'm trying to celebrate her life, and it actually makes me very happy to be able to do this type of images, and I'm having a lot of fun making this work. This is one piece, though, that does make me sad because I found it exactly like this, where the image is kind of being undone, and I feel like, in a way, it kind of encapsulates my mom, that it was this life that unfortunately was taken out of the world too soon, for sure. But there's still something in there, which is, the memory of everybody who knew her. All these pieces were lithographs, color lithographs that I also collaborated with Flatbed Press in Austin. And then this is kind of what I'm going to be doing in my workshop. So these are also x-rays that, she had several heart attacks throughout her life in the past, I want to say 10 years, maybe more. And so she had, regular doctor checkups. And so I decided to also use those. And so for these pieces, I'm combining the x-rays, which are digital prints, and then I'm using pigments to screen print those doilies or those fabrics, those elements into these x-ray pieces. And again, I'm using them to sort of, kind of talk about the figure in a different way, kind of bringing this, enhancing that cellular aspect in putting back into the body, the core of the body, which is the bones. Lastly, I'm going to talk about this project that I did in Germany. This is a power plant where essentially rocket technology was invented. So those are the vengeance weapons, as the Nazis called them, which were the first rockets ever to be built, and they were used obviously during the war. Fortunately, they didn't figure it out completely, so that's why we're not speaking German right now. But I used, that space for inspiration. I did a residency there, and so I made that work. Again, as a printmaker, very experimental. Just I was in the space trying to get as much of rust or whatever I could get into, traces of imprints into paper or whatever. And so I used some of these pieces to then use them as stencils or films to create cyanotypes like this. And then that was the final installation that I did in the actual space, because it became a museum. So now it's a historical museum that tells the story of the time and also of the rocket technology. Werner von Braun, that's where he was working before he came to NASA, just as an FYI. And then this is just installation shots in a museum or a gallery, just to kind of give you a sense of the space, or the size rather. And then out of that project, I was able to actually publish a book. There were two artists who were doing the residency, myself and Gregorio Iglesias Mayo. And that's me. Thank you. That was fast.
Thank you, Miguel. All right, it's an honor and a pleasure to introduce Laura Kishimoto. Laura is a furniture designer and sculptor based in Denver. She graduated from the Rhode Island School of Design in 2013, and her specialty is complex bent laminated wood sculptures. And she creates sculptural furniture best characterized by its spatial complexity and curiously organic forms. Her work is featured in the permanent collections of the Denver Art Museum in Colorado and the Mint Museum in North Carolina. So please join me in welcoming Laura.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for coming out tonight. And thank you to Anderson Ranch for inviting me back to this incredible community. Let's see. Oh, sorry, microphone. So my name is Laura Kishimoto, and I am a sculptural furniture designer and maker. I specialize in a particular type of woodworking called bent lamination. Bent lamination is a technique which involves slicing wood into thin, flexible strips of veneer and then gluing those strips back together to form a curved surface. I have always been fascinated by the relationship that artists develop with their materials. While I have explored other mediums such as steel and leather, woodworking remains deeply embedded in my identity as an artist. My creative process is defined by a constant balancing act between my intentions as a designer and the will of my material. I'm not sure how many of you have experience with woodworking, but one of the founding principles is understanding wood on a cellular level. Wood was never meant to be used by humans as a building material. It is a fibrous plant structure that transports water and nutrients up from the ground and sugars from photosynthesis throughout the tree. When wood is processed into lumber, it continues to breathe and move within the ambient moisture in the air. It still thinks it's a tree. And many woodworking techniques focus on accommodating or minimizing the cellular memory so that rectilinear stock will continue to remain flat and square. I remember when I first picked up a chisel and handsaw for the very first time, how confusing it was negotiating with such a willful material. Wood will cut so cleanly in one direction that you could shave off 1/1000th of an inch with a sharp hand plane, but cut in the wrong direction and it will tear chunks from the surface. I love the fact that wood has so many rules. With more versatile materials like clay and metal, I often find it akin to staring at a blank sheet of paper waiting for inspiration to strike. More rules and restrictions force me to more rigorously vet my designs, which in turn allows me to push wood to its material limits. I was first introduced to bent lamination as a junior undergrad at the Rhode Island School of Design. Something about the process immediately clicked for me. It just seemed so intuitive to embrace the flexibility and curvature of wood and lean into what it is already trying to do. Twist, bow, cup, and crook as the internal tensions are released. Another funny thing about bent lamination is that one of the most common wood glues, polyvinyl acetate, actually mimics lignin, the substance that binds together the cellulose fibers of the wood. So when I slice lumber into thin, flexible strips of veneer and then glue it back together, I am essentially recreating a solid piece of wood. What drew me initially to furniture was the unique position it occupies between the fields of fine art and design. Furniture can both exist as a product, addressing a specific need, or as a standalone sculptural object. And in both cases, a user and/or viewer is necessary to complete the purpose of that furniture, whether to give it function by physically engaging with it, or to give it meaning by imbuing it with their own emotional narrative. When designing a piece, I am looking for when the three-dimensional composition transcends its individual components and starts to look as if it has always existed. If I have too much control over each stage of the design process, the result can often look overworked and contrived. But if I give some control over to the material and allow the wood to show me how it bends, it can result in some spectacularly organic forms. Too much control to the wood, though, often results in a more chaotic piece with a lack of intention. I think the piece that is most representative of my identity as an artist is the Yumi chair. It was my first major foray into the world of bent lamination, and as I have grown as a designer and maker, it has grown to be my most iterated and most successful piece. Of the 3 Yumi chairs that exist today, 2 live in the permanent collections of the Mint Museum in North Carolina and the Denver Art Museum in Colorado. Rather than go through multiple past projects, I wanted to take you on a deeper dive into the evolution of the Yumi chair, since it has had such a profound influence on my life. I made the first iteration of the Yumi chair in school. It began, as many of my designs do, with a paper model. At the beginning of the design process, I cut out strips of paper and experiment with form. I twist and fold the strips, tape them together, then cut them apart, and glue them back together again. I find that the moment I start to become too precious with a design marks the moment that the design starts to stagnate. I think the reason why I'm so drawn to paper is that it blurs the line between a 2-dimensional and a 3-dimensional material. Its insubstantial thickness is counterbalanced by the rigidity of its fibers. For the Yumi chair, I cut out 12 identical strips at a 45-degree angle and added a twist along the length of each strip before rejoining them. The torsion distorted the strips into a series of successive arcs. When I mirrored the 12 strips on the flip side of the 45-degree angle, the form began to resemble a skeletal rib cage. I showed my professor the model, fully expecting to be grilled on its feasibility, and instead he told me, "I like it. Now go figure out how to make it." While the class had covered how to make an extruded curve that bent along a single plane, I had no idea how to create a curve that bent along 2 planes simultaneously. Since each bend of the Yumi chair scribed a unique compound curve, it wasn't feasible to make 24 individual molds. In bent lamination, molds serve 2 purposes: to provide a rigid surface which shapes the desired curve and to evenly distribute clamping pressure so that the laminates glue together successfully. By using the preceding bend as a mold surface, I could shape each successive bend to fan expansively outward. But that still did not address the problem of creating consistent clamping pressure. While searching for solutions, one of my classmates suggested I research traditional Japanese bow making. The Japanese bow, or yumi, is strikingly unusual in appearance. Measuring up to 96 inches in length, it is the largest type of bow in the world and dwarfs its archer. It is also asymmetrical, with the grip positioned 2/3 of the way down. Records of the Yumi bow date back as far as the 3rd century. It is theorized that the asymmetry of its construction comes from using the bow while on horseback or kneeling. Most notably for me, the Yumi chair is constructed from bent laminated bamboo. A craftsman would drive wedges into tightly bound layers of bamboo. The wedging action provides clamping pressure by tightening the hemp cord that binds the layers. And the deeper a wedge is driven, the more dramatically the bamboo begins to bend. The craftsman would bodily manipulate the lamination using his feet, knees, shoulders, and hands to free-form bend the distinctive Yumi profile. No heavy clamps or labor-intensive molds necessary. Though I was still very much a novice to woodworking and design, I had already developed a burgeoning interest in relaxing my control over the design process and allowing the material properties of wood to dictate the form. Freeform bending struck me as a natural extension of this thought process. Using cork-lined sprung steel to sandwich strips of veneer with solid wood wedges, I recreated a rough approximation of the Yumibo process. Due to the deadline constraints at school, I built the first Yumi chair in just 14 days. The final product is clumsy, with conspicuous flaws in its execution, but it was also unapologetically dramatic, as much an art piece as it was a chair. I felt like I had tapped into something that was truly mine. After graduation, I applied for an internship under a designer whose body of work I still find breathtaking, Joseph Walsh. He accepted my application, and in the late summer, I traveled to Kinsale, Ireland with a 1-year work visa. In many ways, I was ill-prepared for the position. The studio was divided among the more traditional lines of head designer and 2 teams of makers. While I had studied fine woodworking techniques in school, greater emphasis had always been placed on design. The makers in that shop were all master craftsmen with decades of experience. It was a multilingual shop made up of mostly French and Japanese men in rural Ireland. I had to learn how to develop a much keener eye for detail and how to anticipate the needs of the master makers. It was a deeply humbling but life-changing experience. I worked most closely with the Japanese master maker Keisuke Kawai. Under his guidance, I learned the more subtle nuances of craftsmanship. During my brief time there, I was proud to make a small contribution to a collection of stunningly beautiful sculptural furniture. After returning to the U.S. from Ireland, I moved to Colorado, hoping to cancel out Ireland's 300 days of rain with Colorado's 300 days of sun. Shortly after, I was given the serendipitous opportunity to show the Yumi chair at the Craft Form show in Philadelphia and the Collective Design Fair in New York. I decided to make the first of what would turn out to be several new iterations of the Yumi chair to address the shortcomings of the original. I had been particularly dissatisfied with how diminished the effect of the original chair became when occupied by a user. For the next iteration, I envisioned a new chair with impeccable craftsmanship and large enough to envelop its user. I began by laminating a spine with dimensions nearly twice the size of the original prototype. I reinforced the outer layers of veneer with fiberglass to create a rigid torsion box. This rigidity would help resist the distortion of the completed bends from the cumulative weight of the clamps. To assist, I recruited a fellow woodworker, Andy Lasser. In Andy's own words, I excel at creating new and exciting problems, and he excels at engineering solutions. Over the years, he has shown me many novel and notably safer ways to handle curved laminations on machines designed for rectilinear stock. Instead of applying clamping pressure with cords and wedges, I seal the veneer in an airtight vinyl bag and pull a vacuum. Creating a vacuum effectively uses the atmospheric pressure as a clamp, which is roughly about 14 pounds per square inch. This is the free-form bending technique favored by the Joseph Walsh studio. Each pair of ribs must be bent simultaneously to ensure that they are as symmetrical as possible. Each new iteration of the Yumi chair has marked new benchmarks in my transition into professional life. The first chair became my first sale after graduating school and leaving my internship in Ireland. The second chair marked the first time I hired Andy and had someone I could closely collaborate with. It later showed at the Sam Maloof Centennial in LA and the Making the Seat at the Table show in Pennsylvania. And the third chair marked my transition from a rental commuted shop space to my own shop, as well as the museum acquisitions. And then I just wanted to end the presentation with what I am currently working on. So both of these projects are still in the design phase, meaning that these are just scale models. But eventually the one on the left will become a glass top coffee table, and the one on the right will become a dining set. Done.
Thank you so much, Laura. And we are going to take questions now. We are streaming live, and people can't hear unless you have a microphone in your hand and they're speaking into it. So we have 2 mic runners who will bring them to you. And we'll also bring Miguel out onto the... Sorry, Miguel. Does anybody have any questions this evening?
Does anybody have questions for either of us?
Hi, Miguel. My question's for you. When I was looking at your work, I couldn't help but make parallels with this kind of performative nature of Felix Gonzalez Torres's work and his, I guess, tendency to invite the viewer to participate and understand like what loss means through the process of taking. And I guess I'm wondering, with your, I guess, reductive techniques with printmaking and its tendency to be, I suppose, like produced as an addition, how you respond to that or think about that?
So the performative aspect is actually just for myself, and mostly because, you know, for the longest time I actually felt, what's the right word? I felt like I wasn't acknowledging what was happening in the city. I mean, I started collecting those stories and those images very early on, before I started making any work, and I don't know why. I just kind of knew that there was something powerful in there and something that I needed to pay attention to. And I think because I went many years without actually making any work about it, maybe I felt like I was being a little bit of a voyeur, you know, in that sense. And so I felt the need of, when I'm making the work, that I'm being truthful and I'm doing justice to those people. Like I said, I'm not judging them. I don't want the viewer to judge them. There's simply somebody's, you know, father, brother, uncle, whatever, you know, that left a family. And that's what I want the viewer to kind of concentrate on. So I feel like that's why, for me, the end result of the, you know, the images are what I need to show to the viewer rather than the performative aspect of it. I tried to record myself when I'm doing those pieces, but it didn't look right to me. It doesn't seem right to me. Yeah. What was the second part of your question?
I guess I was curious to know, like, how, printmaking is generous in its own right. You're pulling from printed matter, so there's this kind of appropriation of images that are there and available. And I guess I'm wondering if you see yourself kind of elaborating on that or moving forward with that process.
Yeah, and I remember now that it's also about the multiple. So, I mean, I'm appropriating those images because, I mean, they're already out there. Mm-hmm. So there's no way for me, I mean, there's no reason for me to try to invent those images. Mm-hmm. In Mexico, we're more familiar to seeing those type of images because we have a culture where that is kind of more of a norm. Since before, we've always been exposed to, really gruesome imagery. I don't know why, but it's just kind of the way that we are culturally. And I knew that was something that I don't want to show necessarily to the rest of the world because not every culture, accepts that. And also, it becomes more of a shocking element that I didn't want the viewer to pay attention to. Mm-hmm. It's more about the reflection of the, the soul or the people that are being left. So that's why I'm appropriating images. I'm using, someone else's images and hopefully changing them in a way that makes you reflect more because the images are very raw and brutal. And my hope is that I'm transforming them enough that everybody can see them in a more, like I said earlier, with a cleansing sort of lens where you can appreciate and really reflect on that was a human being. Mm-hmm. And then the multiple, or the fact, I'm a printmaker, so I always kind of think about the multiple. But again, it also kind of goes in accordance with the idea of the process in that after seeing so many, crime scenes or so many photos, they all start to look alike. I mean, there's so many ways in which the body can fall after, it has no life. And so in a way, I could, find photographs that could look exactly the same, but they were from different events. And so for me, that was kind of like a connection between the multiplicity of the medium as well.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Firstly, I just wanted to thank both of the artists for sharing their work. But my question was for Laura and your Yumi chair specifically. That work was one of the most stunning woodworking pieces I've seen. And I wanted to ask if you plan on making more of those in the future, or if you're planning on using that technique to make more iterations of Yumi chairs.
Thank you very much. So each Yumi chair has taken me about 300 hours to make, and I'm totally over it. Like, I decided that 3 is a really good number, and I don't want to make any more. I will be continuing to use freeform lamination as a medium because that's just the way that my brain works. And that's what excites me the most when I'm designing something.
Awesome, thank you.
This question's for Laura. So you were talking about how while you were bending, you kind of noticed that if you bent too much, or like you were kind of listening to the wood and what it was kind of trying to tell you, and how it wanted to bend, I guess. Have you found different woods to say different things to you while you're bending it? And what is your favorite wood to bend, to work with?
Well, my favorite wood to work with is definitely ash, which is a shame since it's slowly dying all over the US. But it bends really beautifully. It has a really strong, pronounced straight grain. So the surface of these forms isn't as distracting to me because I want people to concentrate on the forms. Other than that, I've used various hardwoods. Oak is a very angry wood and will give you a ton of splinters and it smells like pee when you cut it. Other than that, I don't think anything has like fought me too hard. I don't touch exotic woods, partially for environmentally, but also because they will fight you so hard. Because they're in a really moist tropical environment, they've evolved to resist moisture, including the moisture in glue.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Laura, your work is so beautiful in terms of its sculptural qualities. I'm always curious when they stand as sculpture, what your sentiments or feelings are about having them be furniture as well. I mean, why do you want to have them be both?
That's a really good question. I have done some like purely sculptural stuff, but for me, it hasn't been quite as satisfying. I sort of see the chair or the table as a universal archetype that everyone around the world will recognize. So even if it's been abstracted into a more sculptural form and it's not actually meant for somebody to sit in it, I find that it's like a good way to kind of pull people in and get them to initially relate to the piece, and then be able to kind of speculate more on it.
Hi, this question is from Miguel. Have you shown that body of work in Mexico, and if you have, is the reception different than here?
I have. It took a long time before I actually did. I mean, I've been based in the U.S. I guess officially since 2009, and so most of my work has been shown primarily in the U.S., but then also in Europe. But I was always looking for opportunities in Mexico because obviously that's where the work needs to be shown, and I was just curious also to see what people thought about it. I was able to do it through a group exhibition, and I was invited to also go and do a panel. And I'm not gonna lie, I was very afraid of the reception. I feel, and I still do feel that I'm doing justice and I'm doing the right thing. And I always told myself that if somebody would tell me otherwise, that I would stop making that type of work. Fortunately, everybody who came into attendance for the exhibition and the panel really understood what I was trying to do. And the audience was actually not necessarily art-based, because this was an exhibition that was organized by this company that is trying to kind of raise awareness about different things that affects everybody in the world. So they called it the Museum of Drug Policy. And so it was a 3-week event, and all of the events were based on legalization of certain drugs, for medical purposes, and then how it has affected, obviously, the fact that they're, not regulated or too regulated, I guess, or criminalized. And so I was able to have a chat with survivors or family members who had lost, somebody due to the violence, and they were just super supportive and encouraged me to continue doing what I'm doing. So that really, just was the best, comments that I could have ever had. Unfortunately, I haven't shown as much as I would want to in Mexico, but I do know that my work is known there now too. I've spoken with several people who have seen it, virtually, online, my website, different places. And so I'm really glad that it has happened, but I feel like it needs to be physically there so that it can, because my work is very nuanced. You really have to see it in person. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.